It's not a prepared speech. I can just switch it a bit. How do you switch this? So not all stories about justice are tragic. The ones that we were hearing last time when we had visiting a guest from Kosovo, and the one that we were talking about when we were talking about Ukraine, definitely are tragic and are quite obviously connected to justice. And it's something that people discuss most of the time, like justice in international relations. But justice is this virtue or this moral principle connected to law that can be basically applied to any social situation. And today we are going to try with a great colleague of ours to discuss justice in relation to a thing that happens every 4 years to one of the countries in the world, winning the World Cup in football. This year, or last year, it happened to Argentina, and it was well deserved. And today with us to talk about law, justice, and winning the World Cup is Julieta Rábanos from Buenos Aires, from Argentina. Julieta is currently, she's a postdoctoral fellow of theory and philosophy of law here at our faculty. She started working at the faculty a couple of months ago, and she'll be here with us in the next 2 years. So probably you'll have the chance to talk to her on philosophy of law in the next semester, and you'll be seeing her in the halls of our faculty. She's part of the project of our department, Advancing Cooperation on the Foundations of Law, that the department does with the University of Genoa, University of Surrey, or University of Lisbon. Well, Julieta applied for a postdoctoral fellowship from the University of Genoa, and she was working on the University of Genoa, where she also got her MA and her PhD. She got her law degree in Buenos Aires, and also worked as a postdoctoral researcher at the TREÇA Institute in Genoa. In Latin America and in Italy, she worked as a teaching assistant and as a professor after her PhD, participated as an assistant researcher in various research projects, and even had the time to work as the first minority leader of the Honorable Chamber of Deputies in the Argentine Republic.
Legislative assistant, not the minority leader.
Yeah, okay. It's a mouthful to pronounce that.
Yeah.
But anyways, it's connected to legal practice. Her main research topics are theory and philosophy of law, theoretical models of authority, theories of legislation, theories of legal interpretation and argumentation, as well as legal realism, especially the Scandinavian kind. Today, you will discuss the World Cup with her and see in this great presentation, judging from the text and the outline, what did it mean from a law and justice perspective for Argentina to win the World Cup. I'm stopping here and give the floor to Jules. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. I think that it sounded better than it was in reality, like my life. So thank you, all of you, for being here. As Professor Spaić said, I'm Julieta Rábanos. Yeah, so just to say, if my accent is bizarre, if my pronunciation is bizarre, if you don't understand something, if I'm speaking too quickly, too obscurely, please raise your hand, make a comment. If you don't feel comfortable speaking in English for some reason, please ask or comment in Serbian, and Professor Spaić generously will translate for me, because I know no Serbian yet. I hope to learn something in this.
Years.
But
Yeah.
no. So, well, thank you very much for being here. This, bizarrely, was not my idea, in the sense of this came from the minds of Professor Jovanović and Professor Spaić. They suggested me, why don't you talk about that, because you are Argentinian? And I was like, what the hell does law and justice do with winning the war? So in some sense, this presentation is me trying to come with some connection of between winning the World Cup and law and justice. So, in some sense, when Argentina won the last World Cup, a bunch of people in Argentina said that it was finally justice after what happened in 2014 in the final match with Germany, in which Argentina lost 1-0 in a kind of unfair way. Because at some point Argentina and Germany were very, very similar in possession of the ball, and I think Argentina was a little better playing, but Germany got lucky because of an error, and they scored a goal, and Germany won. So at some point, the majority of the people in Argentina said that what happened in last December was finally justice. Justice for Argentina, justice especially for Messi, because the World Cup was the only thing that he was yet to win. This was kind of anticlimactic, but yes, no.
Okay, you are right.
Okay, now yes. So that was no. So when I was trying to come with what does this have to do with anything, I thought that maybe we can talk about some things regarding law and justice, using the winning the World Cup as an example of different things that, for example, are represented in this list. Talking about winning the World Cup, for example, allows us to ask some central questions about what do we need to answer when we are trying to construct a theory of justice. The other thing is that it allows us to think about the possible relations between law and justice. And in the third place, it allows us to show and try to answer some of the questions with some practical problems or practical examples of situations with conflict of interests. So, regarding the first part, regarding these central questions about a theory of justice, or to try to construct a theory of justice. When you're trying to construct a theory of justice, you basically want to think about generally some kind of criteria or criterion to the allocation of some goods between some people. This is basically like the central elements for a theory of justice. So when you're trying to construct a theory of justice, you have to answer what kind of goods you're trying to distribute, what is the relevant group or groups that you're taking into consideration. You obviously need to have or to identify some relevant criterion or criteria of allocation of these goods between these relevant group or relevant people. You also have to answer what is the relevant time when you are trying to ask this question or when the allocation is going to take place. And in the fifth place, you can ask, for example, what would be the role of law as a social order in all of this. Then you also can, in some sense, ask what is the role of religion or what is the role of morals. In the sense of the fifth question especially has to do with what has to do any social order of some kind, as a group or a set of norms have to do with justice. So, returning to the winning the World Cup, and trying to get into the idea of the question about the goods in a theory of justice. What type of good is winning the World Cup? there are multiple ways to analyze, for example, justice and the good that comes out of justice. Some authors, for example, claim that is happiness. Some other authors, for example, utilitarians, says that is pleasure. There are multiple ways to think about that. But I think that there are two central questions to try to ask and answer when we are talking about the goods that are going to be distributed. The first one is if that good or those goods can be had by someone without affecting the others. And this is a question about what is called rivalrousness. I think that the pronunciation is correct, but I am not really sure. And the other principal question that we can ask about the good to try to classify it is about if someone can be prevented of having the good. For example, I think that the majority goods like air, it's very difficult to have someone prevented to have air. Obviously, you can put that person in a box without air, but the person is going to die. So I think that it's not about, it's not possible or not really possible to have someone excluded of some goods. And this is a question about excludability. So between the combination of this rivalrousness and excludability, you can have, or economists say that you can have 4 types of goods: private goods, public goods, common resources, and what is called, for some reason, club goods. So what do you think that winning the World Cup is?
Both.
Both, okay, so we have someone saying both.
Private good.
Okay, someone saying private good? Okay, private good.
I agree with private.
Private good.
Private, right.
Okay, so you think that it's excludable that you can prevent someone to not have the winning of the World Cup, and then you think that is that if someone has it, it will affect other people not to have it, okay?
Yes.
But what is the relevant group that you are taking into consideration? Because let me just say this, because when you're saying this, I think that you are thinking about countries or you are thinking about national teams, right? Yes. But what about, for example, if you're considering the citizenship of one nation? What type of good, for example, for Argentinians is winning the World Cup?
Maybe a public good.
Okay, so you think that no Argentinian can be excluded of the good, and if I have it, it will not prevent another Argentinian to have it, right? Okay. Well, this difference in the sense of when you were taking into consideration the national teams or the nations in themselves, and when you're focusing in this sense of, for example, the citizenship of some country in particular, this allows you to think about the good in a different way. So to come with the relevant group that you are trying to construct, to then trying to construct a criterion for allocation of the good is very relevant. So when you're trying to have a theory of justice, it's not only about the type of good or about the criterion for distribution. You have to also set what is the relevant group within which you're trying to distribute what. So in this sense, for example, I was trying to, you were too fast in answering. So I was going to propose you to think about this. And for example, if when we are thinking about the winning the World Cup, if we are thinking about only one group, only the direct participants, like the national teams, if we were talking about indirect participants, for example, the citizenship of different nations, or the nations in themselves, like the countries in themselves. Or and if the evaluation, for example, of unjust or just could be different if, and this is interesting, if the final was between different countries. Because, for example, the final was between Argentina and France. And I think that the majority of people in Latin America were very happy to have Argentina winning against a European country.
Except for Brazil.
No, they were
Sure. It went to Latin America. That's
yeah, this is the
Yeah,
point. This is the point. But I think that it would not have been that case if, for example, the final match was between Argentina and Brazil. Or if it were between, I don't know, England and France. Or if it were between Serbia and Croatia. To say something. Yeah, exactly. So also the conditions when we are trying to identify the relevant groups within which we are trying to allocate the things are relevant for not only the determination of what type of good we are trying to allocate, but also it can have some influence in the criterion we are going to decide on to distribute the good. This last question we have already answered. And moving on, we have talked about the goods, we have talked about the relevant groups. What about the relevant criterion of allocation of this good between the members of this relevant group? So, in your opinion, what would be a criterion to say if, for example, Argentina winning the World Cup was a just or an unjust situation? You can use the thing that is here.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I'm so sorry. Yeah. If you would need to set a criterion to say if Argentina winning the World Cup was a just or an unjust situation, what criterion would you use?
Probably some kind of meritocracy or something.
Meritocracy, okay.
For example, the entire course of the World Cup. For example, Argentina's, let's say, all the victories or losses, the entire process of getting to the final of the World Cup. And let's see if it is just or unjust.
Okay. So we have meritocracy, we have the process
Yes.
going to the outcome. Anyone else? Okay, so let's construct some things on these answers. So, for example, meritocracy. Do you think is a procedural or a substantive criterion?
I'd say substantive.
Yeah, because it basically looks at the outcome of the allocation. We're going to think about, okay, what was the end, or what is the situation in itself, and you're going to decide, just looking at the situation, if it's just or unjust based on meritocracy. For example, yeah, this was the better team, the best team, so yeah, it's just. But what type of, in your case, what type of criterion do you think that you're looking at the process things?
A procedure.
A procedure. Okay. In your case, for example, the criterion would be if everything was observed, in the sense of if the process was observed, if Argentina won all the instances, if they respected all the rules arriving to the final, then any outcome of the final would be just. If they had respected the procedures to arrive there. Okay, so this is the difference between, for example, procedural and substantive criteria for a theory of justice. What about, for example, subjective or objective criteria? Can you think about a subjective criteria?
Maybe if a certain person
Yeah.
was rooting for example, Brazil to win the World Cup,
Yeah.
and that's subjective because it's his wish for Brazil to win. And he would say if Brazil were knocked out,
Yeah.
that it is unjust for Brazil to be kicked out of the World Cup because he was rooting for them. And some other nation would be unjust because it goes on in the competition.
So one subjective criterion would be this one, like the individual person saying for some reason this is unjust. Because they feel like that, they think like that, this criterion depends directly on each individual. So for example, here we are basically like 30-something people. A subjective criterion for justice in this sense would be like 35 criteria of justice. One for each of us. And for example, some French person can say, yeah, this was unjust because we didn't win. Okay, that's it. But an objective criterion, for example, is exactly the opposite. So it's something that it doesn't really depend on each individual in particular. How do we arrive to an objective criterion? This is a question mark. There are multiple ways to arrive to an objective criterion. For example, both meritocracy and the procedural thing are objective in this sense, even if they are extremely different, because one is procedural and the other one is substantive. And a third way about thinking of criterion of justice would be thinking about if they are transcendental, if they are rational, or if they are social. In the sense of, for example, someone can say, yeah, this is just because God says so. This is transcendental.
Like God's hand.
Yeah, I didn't want to go into that, but yeah. So at some point, for example, some people in Argentina said that it was just because God wanted that, and they were referring to Maradona, which is dead. And it was in the sky, and basically doing the thing for Argentina to win. And then there were people that were saying that Argentina had paid a bunch of people to win. So, yeah. Maybe Maradona also from the heaven or hell. I don't really know.
Let's subscribe to the God, I thought.
Yeah. So, God. Then the rational. For example, this criteria of justice that comes from nature, but nature in the sense of we are going to say nature and we are going to arrive to the criterion using our rationality. And this rationality is an objective, ideal, immanent one. For example, this type of criteria of justice are very connected with enlightenment. For example, with all the theories that came out of French Revolution, and the idea of basically that we can at some point understand the order of the world if we think about it. Because the rational mind is the same for every one of us. So at some point, using some techniques, we can arrive to some universal and objective truths. Within these truths, some criterion of justice. And the third possibility would be to have a social criterion of justice, which is basically some arbitrary criterion of justice, for example, defined by some positive social order, which can be positive morality, positive law, or in some senses or in some interpretations, some types of religions. In some interpretations. And here I wanted to propose you to think about some possible and well-known criteria of justice. For example, this Justinian maxim, to render to each their due, or this principle of retribution, eye for an eye, evil for evil, or the principle of equality, which is basically all human beings shall be treated in the same way because they are equal. Or the so-called golden rule, so behave in relation to others as the others shall behave in relation to you. And the Kantian categorical imperative, which is a subcategory of the golden rule, which is basically act only on that maxim, whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. So basically, do what you think that it can be converted in a general norm that you could accept. I will not kill you because I think that this not killing the others should be converted in a general norm applicable to all of us. This is basically the idea of the Kantian categorical imperative. And then you have the utilitarian maxim, for example, this idea of maximizing the total happiness of the members of the community, or the idea of having the greater happiness for the greater amount of people. So here you can see clearly what is the relevance to define the group and the type of group, to analyze what is the greater happiness of whom, or what is the greater utility of what. Another question regarding theories of justice can be the time or the relevant time to ask the question of justice, or to try to allocate the goods. I think that one of the first things about the theory of justice is the idea that justice is something that is only relevant if we have a situation in which we have conflicts of interest and scarce resources to be allocated. If we were in a world in which no conflict of interest exists, then the question of justice would not really be asked in this sense. If all of us wanted Argentina to win, all the people, all the world, all the members of the earth, all the people in the universe, so the question about the result, the justice of the result would not be asked, for example. And then if winning the World Cup would be something in totality to be, for example, a public good for everyone, for all the nations, for all the earth, for all the planets, also it would not really be a scarce resource to be allocated. So also the question of justice would not be asked. And I think that the question of justice can be asked before something happens or after something happens. For example, before something happens, you can ask about justice when you define the procedures for the World Cup. And you are thinking, what are the procedures that we can follow for the outcome to be a just outcome or a fair outcome? And then we can ask in an ex post time, when someone has already won the World Cup, was this just? Is there something that was unjust? What is it?
Can I just add an
Yeah,
example?
of course.
I mean, just maybe it's for you to follow. For instance, there is an element of the procedure guys will probably know, but maybe for women who do not follow, girls who do not follow football so closely. So the host of the World Cup is always seated in the first group with the best teams. And in this case, this was Qatar, which is a very lousy team. So it was a huge luck to end up in a group with Qatar, who is the first seeded. So that's the element of the procedure. And then you can ask whether this is just or not. So that's the element before the entire championship started. You already have something to ask whether it is just or not. So that's the element before the fact.
Now I'm remembering something else. There is a rule in which the host has to be in the first match of the World Cup. And looking at the fixture and looking at the availability of the different teams within Qatar's group, they were not going to be the first. So the World Cup started before it should have started because Qatar was needed to be the first in the first match. So yeah, they resolved the situation before the situation was happening because of procedural things. Okay, so we thought about the goods, we thought about the relevant groups, we thought about the relevant criterion of allocation, we kind of thought about the relevant time to allocate or to ask the question. So what about, or what has anything of this to do with law, for example, or social orders in general? Well, first, we can ask, for example, in the case of the World Cup, what law? We are talking about national law, we are talking about international law, we are talking about transnational law. What type of law would be us trying to think about the relation between justice and law in this case? The other question that you can ask yourself, if you're taking law in this case to be synonym with a full-fledged legal system, for example, the Serbian one, or if you're just thinking about law in terms of a particular normative system. For example, the FIFA particular normative system. And the third question that you can ask before trying to answer what does law, does this have to do with justice and winning the World Cup and blah, 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 is law in which sense? Law in the sense of a tool for justice, for achieving the good or managing the consequences of things. Law in the sense of a system to determine the criterion of justice. Law as a system to be analyzed by the criterion of justice. Everything, one of the things, question mark. Okay, before going on, any questions, doubts, comments? No? Great, or not. Okay, so thinking about these last three things and thinking about going from here to some practical applications of all these questions. So when you're trying to analyze possible relations between law and justice, you can have law as a definer of justice, law as a tool to achieve justice, or justice as a criterion to evaluate law. And in the first sense, you can have law as a definitor of justice, in the sense of, well, if you have an objective criterion of justice, and this criterion is so vague that you don't really know how to apply it. For example, if you have to render to each their due. What is their due? Who are them? When? Why? How? Well, these are questions that can be answered by law as a social rule, via some general rules that define who each are, what they are due, when they are due, how is that due to be rendered, and especially, and this is some specific thing, how to ultimately resolve issues between the possibility of not all of the people due something to receive that something. And here, this is connected with the idea of law as a tool or an instrument for justice. It's not about only law to define the criterion of justice, but also to provide for the necessary conditions for justice to be achieved. For example, some goods are in a way in which if you don't have an effective legal system with general norms coordinating human action, it cannot be achieved. For example, in this case, if we didn't have an effective or efficacious normative system, with the FIFA normative system, with all the rules, with all the national laws supporting this, we couldn't have a World Cup, and we could not have someone winning the World Cup. So in that sense, law or social order, social orders in general are needed in some cases to make achievable justice or achievable the good that we are trying to allocate.
Just an analogy to maybe to understand these two different things. For instance, it would be very easy to claim that every one of us shall have a right to vote. And that's obviously something where law would achieve some sort of justice, like the political justice that each of us shall not be excluded from the voting procedures. And that would be the first, the prior moment that law defining some element what is just, or giving someone a due, where each is, as you know, defined by anyone having more than 18 years and having some basic mental capacities to vote. But then, this would be meaningless if there are no other legal rules in which law basically enable this right to vote. If there were no elections, if there were no political parties, if there were no supporting institutional capacities, basically to effectuate this right. So that's the distinction between law as a definitor of justice and a tool to achieve political justice. If winning elections is some sort of we want to have some sort of political justice in democratic system. So that's a kind of maybe analogy that would be a more general level you will understand. But this is also fairly understandable if we were not in the the ownership of the supporting instruments, mechanisms, and institutions. No winning World Cup would be possible in the first place.
Just a thing that I was thinking with this: if there were an institution, a social order, there wouldn't be the idea of winning the World Cup. So in this sense, also, for example, this existence and efficacy of this social order also constitutes the good that we are trying to achieve. Because if the FIFA didn't exist, or if that normative system was not efficacious, we wouldn't have the possibility to think about the World Cup.
Yeah.
So in that sense also, it makes it possible to not to only achieve it, but to have it.
Yeah, we have a very famous movie about the first World Cup in which our national team went in Montevideo. So probably all of you watched the movie, and you can remember that there was basically it was decision that had to be made upon very practical considerations. Whether do we have enough money to travel to Montevideo from here? So there were no institutional mechanisms. It was first World Cup was basically by special calls to several of the football associations and their willingness to support the idea. And once they were there, then they basically created some more firm institutional setup for the football to be established.
We'll try to watch.
We'll find you.
Okay, so after this, the third possible relation in a wide sense would be to take justice as a criterion to evaluate. In this sense, clearly, these three things are not exclusive in the sense of you can use justice to evaluate law and then you can use law to achieve justice, or you can use law to define justice. In some ways, the first and the third are not compatible, yes, but it depends on the type of criterion of justice that you're using. If it's an objective one, in the sense of the legal system defines what justice is, maybe it's difficult to use it to evaluate the legal system, but then it is possible. If, for example, you think about the criterion of justice to be determined by constitutions, you can have the situation in which you are trying to evaluate the legal system in the sense of the set of legislative enactments analyzed by this criterion of justice in the Constitution, or defined by the Constitution. But yeah, let's put an asterisk there. So basically, justice can be used as a criterion to evaluate law, and this means that the evaluation can be of individual norms or the system as such. And then, if a discordance between justice and law can be identified, we have multiple possibilities, multiple consequences. For example, thinking, okay, this is unjust, so we are going to change it. This is unjust, so they are not really legal norms or valid legal norms. Okay, these were valid legal norms, but they are so unjust that we are going to consider that they are not valid norms, which is the idea of Rathruch, for example. Then saying, okay, yeah, these are unjust, but they are valid, so who cares? The other considering, for example, okay, these are just norms. They have not been enacted by anyone, but as they are just, they are part of the legal system. And this is working, for example. And so on, and so on, and so on. So you can have a bunch of different positions regarding this discordance between justice and law, in some sense. And we are going to see it with a practical application of all of this. Yes. So, maybe some of you know, if you don't, you are going to laugh a little. There were two particular situations about Argentina winning the World Cup. One was the case of Argentinian goalkeeper Dibu Martinez and his actions in the final. The other one was something that you are not going to know, but what happened in Argentina, in the country, after winning the World Cup. And we are going to, I hope, see both of them. Okay, so regarding the case of Argentinian goalkeeper Dibu Martinez, what happened? So this goalkeeper basically used some particular tactics in the final. He used them all through the process of arriving to the final, but they were in particular explicit in the final match. So he basically danced, made gestures, said provocative things, approached the kickers, kicked the ball like far away, basically riling up rivals. So they break their concentration and they had a possibility to miss their kicks. In fact, here he's dancing, here he's approaching Mbappé, saying a bunch of things that I couldn't find a video to. And here is he receiving a yellow card, and here is he kicking the ball in the other direction with this French player that I don't know how to pronounce the name. Chouameni? Okay, I'm so sorry. Was trying to arrive to the place to kick the ball. Okay, now we're resumed. Basically, after doing all of this, he was not banned from the game. He didn't receive a red card. He just received a yellow card, and he managed to have 2 French players to miss their penalties. So basically, this was instrumental for Argentina winning the final match of the World Cup. Because there were 4 French kickers, and 2 of them missed after this dancing and approaching and kicking the ball and stuff. So a bunch of people asked, where was this legal? Or if legal, was this just? Well, regarding the legality of the actions of the goalkeeper, the situation about the penalties is under the applicable law of International Football Association Board, the laws of the game 2002-2003, in virtue of Article 35 of the Regulations FIFA World Cup 2022. And basically you have Law 14 about the penalty kicks, the penalty kick that applies to also penalties that are not in the middle of the ordinary game but come, for example, in case of draw. And you have this idea of the defending goalkeeper must remain on the goal line facing the kicker between the goalpost without touching the goalpost, crossbar or goal net until the ball has been kicked. And then the article goes on talking about offenses and sanctions, and it says that once the referee has signaled for the penalty kick to be taken, the kick must be taken. If it's not taken, blah, 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 and then it says that if before the ball is in play, one of these things occurs, and especially in the case of the goalkeeper offending, like doing some offense, then if the player misses, the kick is only retaken if the goalkeeper offense clearly impacted on the kick. Blah, 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 blah. So, the thing was, in this situation, the competent authority, which was the referee, understood the situation as either not under the scope of the norm, in the sense of all of this happened before signaling for the kick to be taken, all the dancing, all the kicking the ball away, blah, blah, so maybe it was not under the scope of the norm, or the first 2 ones. They were not considered as an offense, or even if an offense, they were not clearly, it was not clear that they clearly impacted on the players. So in this case, the referee didn't allow for the penalties to be retaken. But a bunch of people thought that this was unjust. In the sense of different people, especially French people, also people from England, a bunch of people from the Premier League where Denis Martinez plays, said that this was cheating, that this was bad sportsmanship. A bunch of things were said. For example, and here comes the thing that I was talking about before. Some people said that even if they were legal, these actions, the actions were against the spirit of the game, thus unjust. So the laws should have had to be ignored, like Law 14, and the referee would have just had the penalties to be retaken. Other people said that the laws allowed for an unjust result, so they would not be, or they should not be considered to be valid laws. So they should have been ignored, and Martinez should have been banned, and or the penalties retained. Other people said that they were so unjust that they should have followed the same idea, Martinez being banned, and then the kids to be retaken. And other positions said that the actions were legal, in the sense of they were deemed legal by the competent authority, so even if they were unjust, they are valid, and that's it. And other people said that they were just because they were legal, and that was it.
That's can you
Yeah.
These are all analytical possibilities if we are discussing the relationship between law and justice. And this is what, by the end of the course, you will hopefully get as some sort of tools in order to analyze these situations. Because this just reminded me, I think you don't have it in the presentation, but there was a petition signed by more than 200,000, mostly French people, in which they wanted the final game to be replayed because they consider it to be unjust. And that's a very vague feeling of the unjust outcome of the game. And now Julieta is showing you all the possibilities when you are claiming something is unjust. What is particularly was unjust about the game? These are the possibilities in relation to this specific thing about the goalkeeper.
I was remembering, I had forgotten about that petition because that petition appeared and immediately there was a petition created by Argentinians for the French people to stop crying about and I think that the French petition had about, I don't know, 1 million signatures or 2,050 signatures, and the other petition, the Argentinian petition, had in 3 or 4 hours like 1 million signatures. Yeah, I have forgotten, but it's a very nice point.
I didn't know about this everyone.
Yes. But the thing is, what happened? This is what happened, and these were the discussions that were being held, and what happened afterwards. So the International Football Association Board adopted the 4th position, so that the actions were legal because they were deemed as such by the competent authority, so the result was illegal, but they thought that it was unjust. So what did they do? They modified the laws for the next season. And now, Law 14 reads like this. The defending goalkeeper must remain on the goal line, facing the kicker between the goal posts without touching, blah, 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 blah. The goalkeeper must not behave in a way that unfairly distracts the kicker. For example, delay the taking of the kick by pushing the ball away, for example, or touch the goal post, crossbar, or goal net. I think that they should have included like dancing or something, because it was clearly a response about the situation, trying to avoid the situation to happen. So here you can see an action that was taken after deemed unjust the result. That was permitted and legal because of the procedure. So under these new rules, clearly the goalkeeper could have been banned, or the kicks retaken. So clearly maybe Argentina would not have won the World Cup, because the result depended heavily on these 2 missing kids. Well, the second situation is what happened in Argentina after the winning of the World Cup. So following the winning of the World Cup, which was a Sunday, there were massive, informal and spontaneous celebrations all over the country. And they were really massive, really over the top, kind of not as uncontrolled as you could think about, like 20 million people celebrating spontaneously at the same time. In fact, we were talking about with Professor Spaić that only 1 person died. in the middle of this, in this uncontrolled situation, only one person died. This is like kind of miraculous. It's tragic that someone died, but it's miraculous. So here you can't see it, but you have like 3 million people here. There were a bunch of people like climbing. This is like 3, 4, or 5 meters high there. People climbing everywhere. Here we have a drone view about all the thing. So yeah, so there were these uncontrolled, spontaneous celebrations. And then the government, the federal government, decided that on Tuesday, this was a Sunday, on Tuesday, that where the Argentinian team, the national team, was going to return to Argentina, a formal and prepared celebration was going to be held. And this planned celebration included having the national team on a bus coming from near the airport to the center of Buenos Aires city and doing a tour in the middle of a bunch of people, like to basically doing something like the popes and or the Orthodox leader passing with the. So they were trying to get something on the likes of, and they were planning as such. So as a result of this decision, on the one hand, an enormous police operative was prepared. A bunch of police people from a bunch of jurisdictions were being brought to the city of Buenos Aires and one part of the province of Buenos Aires. And then, and this was one of the most controversial things, a bank holiday was decreed. A bank holiday in the sense of a festive day, like a day in which no one is going to work, everything's closed. So, the thing was that on Tuesday, between 4 and 5 million people arrived to the city of Buenos Aires. And they basically blocked everything. Because you had like 5, 6 million people, said some estimations, in the middle of the official circuit that was made public. Because the idea was for the people to salute their national team. So after some excruciating hours trying to get through the people and doing like basically 15 kilometers and having 2 people jump from a bridge to try to land on the bus. One did, the other one fell, he didn't die. Then they were like, yeah, this is not going to happen. So they didn't arrive to the city of Buenos Aires. At some point, they just turn left, and then they were brought to this airdrome, in which they boarded some helicopters. So they flew over the city, and basically no one was able to see them. This was the situation. Yeah. So, yeah, this is the highway. This is like 15 meters above the ground with all these people. And clearly the bus was not going to go through. And this is the helicopter that no one saw, but they were there. So, after all of this, clearly some controversy was happening. And there were some discussions about what happened. One of the discussions was about if it was just to allocate all of that public resources, which were millions of dollars, to organize that kind of celebration, which was basically just 20 people winning the World Cup. So in Argentina, football is a big thing, clearly. But if you have a country going through a crisis, a very big crisis as Argentina in this moment, question mark about allocating all these public resources to do this. So a bunch of questions were going on, like for example, who were the beneficiaries of the celebration? Because at some point, no one saw the people, and no one saw the national team. The government may have benefited from that idea, from that celebration, but the national team decided not to go to the governmental house. So, who were the beneficiaries of that? Then also the other question was who were the prejudicate group or people regarding the allocations of these resources? And what about the people who didn't really care about food? Was it just for them to have all these public resources spent this type of thing?
Do you actually know any Argentinian? Do you actually know any Argentinian who don't care about football?
My godfather and my aunt. Yeah, they are the minority, yes. Yes. But yeah, I know.
Did you tell me that your uncle wasn't the father?
No, my cousin.
Your cousin, yeah.
His son, in fact, yeah. Yeah, my uncle, for example, cares about Formula One, and my godfather cares about marathons. Yeah, random, yes. But okay, it's a fair question to ask about. The other discussion was if it was just to decree a national-wide bank holidays. Okay, this is bank holiday, not bank. When the only affected part of the country was a piece of the city of Buenos Aires and a very tiny piece of the province of Buenos Aires. And the bank holiday was national-wide. So people in 3,000 kilometers from the city of Buenos Aires, they were basically with no businesses open. People that are paid by work, they were not being paid because they couldn't work. For example, was this just? And the last thing that was a controversy about the justice of what happened was about the allocation of police resources. Because all the police that was allocated to the city of Buenos Aires and that piece of the province of Buenos Aires were taken from a bunch of neighborhoods in which not all the people in those neighborhoods were going to the city of Buenos Aires. So what happened? Was that just to allocate security, so to balance between the happiness about winning the World Cup and the public security of the people that maybe didn't care or wouldn't go to the celebration for some sense? So it was a very huge discussion about it. That's it.
That is the slide with the pictures that you've taken from the.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So, let me just.
Is it this one? Yeah, that's that one.
So,
The fantastic guy who was running with the.
this one,
Yeah.
this one,
Yeah.
and this one were taken by me.
Yeah, actually, she was live WhatsApping us while the thing was happening. Jules was sending messages.
Yeah, there were some bizarre things happening. I saw something, for example, this guy.
That's fantastic.
This guy basically is running on the ceilings of bus stops. Yes, so I have a video that I couldn't really put in the slide, but the guy, this ceiling of the bus stop was 100 meters long, and the guy climbed there and he basically ran all the ceiling like a catwalk with the flag, like, yeah, and he could have fallen. So obviously also these ones These are the ceilings of bus stops. Yeah. And they were at some point, so here they are quite empty still. But on Tuesday, when part of the official circuit for the bus was going to pass through this street, which is called the 9 de Julio Avenue, which is one of the central avenues in the city of Buenos Aires, all this ceiling was full of people. Like you couldn't see the ceiling of the bus stop. No ceiling collapsed. This was miraculous. Yeah.
The act of God, and
Yeah, so this was presidential justice, clearly. Yeah. So it was a very bizarre thing. In fact, some people decided to force the entrance in the obelisk, and they basically climbed up to here, and they were climbing here. And they were, yeah. So it was a miracle that no one died, just one guy. Yeah. So
just what kind of unrelated accident to
it was,
the celebration.
but it was kind of unrelated because the guy was basically alone and he jumped on a metal ceiling and the metal ceiling collapsed. And he fell and he died. But he was alone. Yeah. So yeah, it was a crazy moment for the country. And there were a bunch of things going on. So some things, for example, that I didn't include in the presentation were questions about the allocation of public resources to foment football in Argentina, for example. Discussions about if it is just to allocate scarce public resources in trying to develop football in Argentina, considering the importance of football for Argentina. Or if those resources would be better allocated, for example, for general education. Yes, please.
Do you think you talked about the changing of the rule when taking a penalty?
Yeah?
And do you think that modification in some way confirmed that the win was unjust?
Well, I think that it confirms that a majority of people thinks about that in terms of injustice. Here, the problem is that for example, under an objective criterion of justice based on the social order at that time, I think that the answer is no. It was not unjust under those presuppositions. But it was unjust because they thought, and this is something that is also related to philosophy of law, they think about norms in terms of rules that are backed by principles. So, for example, if you have a rule X, this rule X is the result of a generalization that tries to achieve something, for example. And in this sense, I think that a bunch of people thought that the rules, as it were, and the rules, as it were, that allowed for that situation to be considered legal, they were not reflecting the spirit of the rules. So, for example, in some discussions, this is, in law, this is an argument to make that particular rule inapplicable to a case. So to say, yeah, so this is the rule, but the principle behind the rule says that you have to have this result, or you cannot arrive to this consequence. So to not arrive to this consequence, we cannot follow the rule. So I think that what happened in this case was that the majority of the people, but especially the International Football Association Board, considered that the rule as it was, without this clause, allowed for a situation against the spirit of the law in itself to happen. So the law had to be modified to include or to explicit this type of thing. Because sometimes what happens is that there is something that all the people agrees that cannot happen, but then it happens. So they are like, but we thought that this could not happen under this rule. But in fact it did. So they changed the rule to try to adapt the rule to exclude that situation to being able to consider, to being considered legal here.
Just to contextualize with regard to this situation, this is not the first change of rules regarding what can goalkeeper do. So you have to think of the situation that basically rule has to cover the most important situation. That's the situation in which you have the penalty kicker and you have the goalkeeper. Obviously, this rule now covers the situation prior to that, because that was the thing in the game with Argentinian goalkeeper.
Yeah.
But for instance, it used to be in previous times that the goalkeeper could not move at all before the penalty kick is taken. So he cannot move left, right, which now he can. Because that was considered to be some sort of unfair distraction of the penalty kicker. But then again, it's a 7 meters 20 a big goal, so at some point obviously someone thought, okay, we should give the goalkeeper the chance at least to move left, right. And then again there were rules regarding that his foot, at least one foot, should be on the line at the moment when the penalty kicker is taking the shot. So all these elements of the rule basically has to provide a concretization of the principle of some sort of a fair or predicting the unfair kind of the unfair behavior of the goalkeeper and unfair provocation regarding the penalty kicker. So this is a kind of just one of the rules in line of these changes that basically has to bring this principle in life. Whether it is right or not, we can always debate.
Yeah, but it's also a problem because it's kind of this inherently unequal situation, because it's not an in-game goal that you're scoring, it's kind of a penalty kick goal. And like when you have a situation with the goalkeeper protecting 7.5 meters of a goal and somebody shooting from a straight line, it's quite kind of obvious that the goalkeeper is actually in a worse situation than, like at least physically, mentally you can be in various situations, but the chance of blocking a shot from 60 meters, it's kind of very low. So there is this, when you confine the goalkeeper to the line or to not moving before the guy shoots, it kind of now seems to us quite obvious that it's kind of unfair, because you're taking from him the only tools he has to kind of even the game a bit. And even in this case, that's probably the reason why they didn't push too much in terms of goalkeeper behavior, because it's an inherently, it's a situation in which the goalkeeper is in a worse position, almost by definition.
I understand everything that the professor said, but I think that if something is legal or illegal is one question, and if something is just or unjust is another question.
Yes.
Not for in this case, Martinez, I don't know how it's pronounced, his act wasn't illegal under previous rules, but now it would have been. But we can look at retroactively, if that's the adjective. But just the fact that they changed the rule, I think that just on the moral side they on the moral side, they maybe thought that it wasn't really right. Not that it wasn't legal, but it wasn't right on the moral side. That's why I asked if it's unjust. I know that it was legal at the time.
Yeah, I think that it depends. What I was trying to say, thank you for the follow-up. What I was trying to say is that it's just as, not just in the sense of justice, but precisely here the problem is what is the criterion that they are using to define if it was just or unjust. I don't know, in the sense of, I think that they thought, for example, in terms of fairness, and that they thought that the old rules were evening the field, and they discovered that they weren't. So they accepted that the rules allowed for an unjust outcome on the basis of the principle that was behind the rule. So yes, they changed the rule. So trying to reflect their intuition of justice in that moment. But in that sense, what I was trying to provoke in this sense is the question about what is the type of criterion of justice that they were using. In the sense of, if we think about the situation in these senses, the principle behind the rules that are enacted, and we are just saying that the rule was unjust because it didn't reflect the principle in an acceptable way. So it allowed for these situations to happen, these unjust situations to happen. So in that sense, the criterion of justice could be a social one, provided by the same social order that now is changing the text of the rule to try to adequate the rule, to produce this type of justice. That was just the provocation that I was trying to give. Yes, I think I wanted to show you this, because this happened 2 days ago, this changing. It was published 2 days ago. And this is one of the main ways to see how these ideas of justice impact directly on law. In this sense, in this case, on a particular normative system, which is like the FIFA. But yeah, this is the circle. The rules generally change because someone thinks that they are unjust, or they allow for unjust outcomes, or they allow for unjust procedures, because here the procedure was absolutely respected, but the outcome was the problem. So thank you for your question.
We'll have kind of, but you're free to raise your hand and ask questions. Just additionally, these kinds of situations are quite common in social situations when state laws, for example, change. Sveta Kostić and Miloš Zdravković in one of the last lessons will debate about the justifiability of changing regulations regarding leases in Belgrade, the prices of leases. So, spoiler alert, Sveta will claim that it's justified to put a boundary on the amounts that you pay for renting an apartment, and Miloš will claim that it's not justified to put a boundary. The claim from Sveta Kostić is prompted basically by this idea that the prices have risen so much that it is unjust for people to pay these prices anymore, and that there should be legislative intervention, like in this case, there was legislative intervention for future cases in order to kind of like at least dampen a little the insane prices that the renting of apartments comes to now in Belgrade. Of course, the other claims can also, and I'm sure Miloš will do a great job of justifying the other claim on the other side. But this was prompted because it's a request for reform. This was prompted by this very situation. So a situation started happening which, by and large, societally is considered to be unjust.
na srpskom.
I can't translate, so I don't know. This is the. No, she just mentioned that it's easier to speak in Serbian. Yeah, of course, when you have this societal context, but also in football, look, you can have unintended consequences of regulation. In this case, one of the unintended consequences, like in the cases that Miodrag mentioned, obviously, kind of like when you regulate it in such a way that the goalkeeper can't move from the line, the unintended consequences is the amount of actual injustice actually increases. Because the guy who is in the worse off position can't basically move. He has to stay all the time there. In societal context, it's also like that. This is why games of any kind, and people usually take chess to be a game to compare social life with, but also football, are good analogies to societal life. For example, in this case, if you regulate the amount of rent, if you regulate it heavily, you could have injustice in other places. Impacts of the policy would be huge, of course, because then the market wouldn't influence the rents, and you would have aberrations. You would have to do it for Belgrade, but what would happen with Niš, for example, and Novi Sad? So those are not easy things to regulate, and in this case also, I mean, if you are not confronted with this situation, usually the best idea is to regulate the least possible that you have to, if you don't, or at least until you encounter this one situation.
Some of the things that you mentioned today, we will go through the conceptions we haven't yet talked about, for instance, utilitarian conception of justice, or you will also listen something about the Rawlsian conception of justice. So they were all tackled here a little bit. There is one thing that we will not have, and it's not part of the curriculum, it's part of another important conception of justice, but I would like to draw the attention because it was raised in Jules' presentation, and that's the element of how we value, in the first place, the good that is to be allocated. In this case, that's the question how we evaluate some sort of a sports achievement as a social good. Because according to that achievement, we have a number of, as you can see, policies. And I will just give you a comparison which will maybe make you understand more easily what I'm talking about. I happened to be in Germany when Germany won 7-1 Brazil in the final World Cup final, which was taking place in Brazil. So, luckily I was not at that point in Brazil. I can imagine what was the situation. But let me tell you what was the situation in Germany. I mean, they were cheering up a little bit maybe after the midnight, and the next day everything was functioning like nothing happened. Like literally nothing happened. I exchanged kind of a little small talk conversation with people at the Institute of Law faculty where I was at that moment, and nothing beyond that. And this was even more insane. In the halftime of the game, and Germany already had 5-0 in the halftime. I remember the TV news, German TV news, and they were worried about the reaction of Brazilian population and whether this will cause social unrest, some demonstration. that was the topic, and I could not believe my eyes. and that was the reaction of Germans towards the result, the game, and that was the reaction basically to one social good, namely the winning some sport event. It was just kind of another thing in their lives, nothing more different. But here you have a completely different kind of attribution of importance to this social good. And from that moment
A
on,
normal attribution.
normal, yes.
Or
From our
as we call it, normal attribution. Important.
And then from that moment on, you have a line of different policies, which very much affect whether we will call this certain policy just or unjust. So the very first moment, how we value certain good is in a way determining the rest of our discussion about justice. And this is something which is here also very, very important to mention.
Yeah, Susan.
I was going to say similar thing that Professor Jovanović said. Now, you said that the bizarre thing is that man who's standing on the ceiling of the, what is that?
Yeah.
I was thinking at the time, well, that would be bizarre if you were presenting this in England or in Germany, but for us, it's not bizarre.
For me, yeah. Yes. So I was here in Belgrade when Argentina was playing with, what was it? It was not the Netherlands because I was in a plane. The other match. Mexico? No. Well, I was.
Something in the
I
group
was-
stage.
No. After
I went away from our
Croatia, but I can't remember.
Yeah, but it was
Croatia, yes.
no, it was not Croatia.
No,
Before
it
that.
was not.
It was in the group stage.
No.
I think after the
It was before, yeah, it was before the Netherlands.
Australia.
Australia? No, I think that it was before Australia, the match before Australia. I cannot remember for my life because I was here in a bar shouting and the people were like, what are you doing? And there was the waiter saying, I am a big supporter of Argentina, and I was shouting and the people that were with me, who were Italians by the way, they were filming me. And you could think that Italians were going to be like empathic. I think that, yeah.
No, I'm not just rooting for your.
No, they were basically like, what is she doing? They were Claudia and Maria Paula.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. So I, at some point, yeah, I could understand that because also we had a meeting on that. That week we have a meeting. We had a meeting with here, and they arrived after the match in Serbia. And I was outside one of the bars with all the people like this. The day that Serbia lost. And I decided to go away.
One would imagine that you get used to it. You're football,
No.
but no, it doesn't.
So I returned to this slide to say, at some point there were discussions in Argentina about what would happen if we lost the final. Because, so when you have winning the football match, winning the World Cup in some sense is kind of a symbolic. It's immaterial. But it's so strong, its importance in Argentina, for example, is so strong that the possibility of that being lost again after Brazil 2014, for example, and in the special economic, social, and political situation in Argentina in this moment, was thought about like a possible catastrophe. Like they didn't really know how the society could react if we were to lose. So they were preoccupied at some point. They were really preoccupied. Not only the German, the German, how do you say this in English? The people that are
Tankers or commentators.
the commenters. Yeah, no, the government was
Right.
thinking about what will happen. Not only in terms of politics, in the sense of, at least in Argentina, football is very linked to legitimacy, political legitimacy at some point. But yeah, it was a very huge discussion. So yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, as you were mentioning that one of the questions was whether or not it was justified.
Thank you.
It was justified spending that amount of money for the preparation of the arrival of the general. But it seems to me like that the government, am I correct, Argentina is going through a very big inflation or something like that, the economic crisis. So I think that it was kind of a pragmatic move by the government to revert the energy from, I guess, real social problems into something as immaterial and pointless as winning a championship. I'm sorry, I don't know that bias. And in a way, that was just a classic age-old tactic of using sports and things like that to avert the crisis in real.
Yeah, written service from the Romans directly to nowadays. Yes, in some sense it was. But the question there is like, yeah, pragmatically we understand that this was done because of that. Something's going.
Because of problem.
Sorry.
No, so pragmatically is very understandable that we're trying to do so. But was this just? Are we going to use a pragmatic criterion, for example, to define if this was just or not? So this is the question. What type of criterion of justice we are going to use to analyze this? Because, for example, a pragmatic person in politics, for example, would say, yeah, this was just because, or as a consequentialist, this was just because it avoided, for example, unnecessary consequences of the people nevertheless trying to do that. Or, for example, the bank holiday was defended saying that it was just to do that also in a national level because all the people was going to be distracted and all the people had to have the possibility to celebrate one good thing that was happening. So in that sense, yes, with that criterion clearly, it was just. But then if you use another criterion, for example, the criterion of why don't you separate or why don't you try to use that money to resolve the problems that are causing all the situation, the bad situation to be in place? Why do you spend the money to try to patch the situation instead of trying to resolve it? So under that criterion, the thing wasn't just. So in this sense, the problem would be what criterion is best to analyze the situation. And this is something that a theory of justice cannot offer. A theory of justice can just, for example, defend one type of criterion, but then what criterion are we going to use is a choice. And that's the big issue. I think that you were raising your hand.
Yes, I was raising my hand. I wanted to continue what my colleague said.
Of course.
Well, on the one hand, it was a lot unjust to the people who don't care about football, as little as there are such people in Argentina. But I'm thinking that it wasn't just about the people who love football. It wasn't just about celebrating the win, but rather an attempt to make something that would make the public be a little bit more, how should I say it,
Sedate.
maybe not that, but I suspect that since Argentina is in a huge economic crisis, that the people is not satisfied about that. So if you give them something to be happy about, it's a political move to prevent, shall we say, some conflicts in the people or something like that. So in a very long-term perspective, maybe it was beneficial to the whole people because, to be fair, all those millions of dollars are a huge amount, but not enough to solve the crisis, of course, or the crisis would have been solved by now. But if we prevent a civil war by this one, not by this only, but certain steps which appease the people, maybe something. So I'm still against this, but maybe there is a silver lining.
Absolutely, in the sense of if you think about it in consequentialist, with a consequentialist analysis, this can be deemed as just. In fact, this can be deemed as very just, like the best thing to do. In fact, for example, I was trying to introduce the question about what type of good winning the World Cup is, and I was trying to make you pay attention about the relevant group. And this is why I introduced that you were thinking about national teams, and I could have thought also of citizenship of a country in particular. Because winning the World Cup, it's an immaterial good, which is kind of, for example, a public good, but it's also a democratic good, because everyone can have it. It doesn't matter who you are, what is your situation, what is your social status, it's for you. You are part of it. So, in this sense, Argentina is in this moment politically divided, very politically divided into big groups of people. This united all the people because it didn't care. All the people that were here, all these people didn't care about politics, didn't care about if the other person was defending the right wing, the left wing parties, they didn't care. It didn't matter. So in that sense, winning the World Cup was a just or dedicating resources to try to make the people able to celebrate winning the World Cup. It was a fantastic move in that sense. Because all the people, so I was in Argentina at that moment, all the people for 5 days, a week, forgot about the differences, the political differences, forgot about the economic crisis, forgot about everything for 1 week. And it was, I think, the first time in 10, 15 years that I saw the people like hugging on the street randomly, and no one asked anything about anything. So the political division didn't care. The social status didn't matter. It was the first time in about 15 years. So in this sense, yes, of course, it was a fantastic move to do this. Even if the operative was a failure in the sense, and blah, blah. So the problem was that when it was clear that the operative and the tour was not going to happen, the problem was that a very explosive outrage, social outrage, was expected to happen because these 6 million people were together in the middle of a city with police that were clearly overwhelmed, that it was impossible to contain 6 million people in the same, it was impossible to manage. And when it was clear that the national team was not going to make the tour, the problem was thinking about what would happen with all these people who were not being able to celebrate in the way that they wanted. And a bunch of, it was not controversy, but worry about what would happen. At some point, they thought that the people were going to destroy everything. Because you were hyping them. And then there were 6 million people, it's 5 million people. So there is also this toxic mentality when you are in a mass of people. So one starts and then all the people follow. Miraculously, nothing happened. But it was against the odds. It was really against the odds. So yeah, a bunch of bizarre things.
Yes, a bunch of bizarre things, really, it's incredible. But
I'm still surprised.
although I have to admit that I'm not sure there was only one casualty, because if the city was this collapsed, who knows how many medical emergencies there were, and the medical personnel couldn't reach them, for example. I'm not sure if there is any statistics on that.
They were very overwhelmed, and there were, so there are some statistics, and the medical services were also surprised, because there were, like, basically very few medical emergencies in comparison with the proportion of medical emergencies that were expected to happen with that much of people.
No, I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about the people living in the city. And for example, an elderly person having a heart attack, and then the emergency vehicle can go through the city and reach them, or something like that.
So they were concentrated. Yes, okay. They were concentrated in one part of the city. So the city of Buenos Aires is huge, and the majority of the hospitals, unfortunately, were not here. And I think that in the cases that I know, that something happened here. So someone was had to be taken away from here in the middle of the people. The people moved to let the ambulance go through. I don't know. I can't explain it.
Miraculous things, yeah. But it was great to see that all these people could stand at one place together due to this event, especially knowing that a couple of years ago, maybe some of you guys probably might remember that the finals in the Copa Libertadores between two Buenos Aires teams, River Plata and Boca Juniors, had to be allocated to Madrid because of the huge violence between the fans in two games. So for the safety reasons, it was eventually played in Madrid. So having that in mind, this was really miraculous.
But in that case, the thing is, winning that cup was not a public good for Argentinians.
Yeah.
That
was divisive, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
That was excludable and very divisive,
exactly.
Very rivalry. Yeah.
There was one point in which Julieta said, like, if you travel 3,000 kilometers from Buenos Aires, and that may be also, like, you kind of, when you look at pictures, you're not aware of the sizes in Buenos Aires, and you're not aware of the sizes in South America. You're aware that if you travel 3,000 kilometers to the north, you would end up in Norway somewhere in Europe. Yeah, but in Argentina, no, most of the time, no. And Buenos Aires is indeed a huge city. This amount of people would cover probably, I don't know how much of Belgrade, but probably at least the end of the Boulevard Pravda. Yeah, but that's the amount of people of the entire Serbia. So let's thank Julieta once again for her presentation.
Thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for your patience, your questions, your comments, and your attention.
Thank you.